We are going to talk today about your latest translation of the book called My.
Yeah.
The book is written by Geetanjali Shree, and I would love to know how was the whole process of translating it into English. So tell us more about your experience so far with this book.
Okay, well, I think the very first step is to read and reread the original novel, enjoying it thoroughly, which is what I did to an extent. And it's not just enjoying, you enjoy a lot of novels that you read. It's something more personal, you take to it, you feel attracted by it, it becomes part of you. Those are the things that happen. Something about the language really felt very close to me. Something about the storyline felt familiar. It was, as if in another world, I could have written it in another universe. So that, and then there was this rather more objective historical, political awareness that this story would never reach the world. It would never reach English speakers. It would never make any impact globally. If it just remained, and Hindi is far from a niche language. It's not that it's spoken by a tiny number or anything like that. But the fact remains that it is only read in North India. And the fact remains that we do have very few translations in India, even among all the other languages of India, and certainly into European languages. So I was a bit worked up about the Salman Rushdie, much as I like his writing and all that, but ripples on the global scene as if he's the only author from India and he has invented good literature, good writing. And then he published this book with the best excerpts from India, in which there were no Indian language writers at all. So I definitely had a mission that a Hindi novel should reach the world stage. And the way I could think of doing it was very easy actually for me because I'm totally bilingual. So I could read or write in Hindi and English almost to the same level.
Great. And I also see a lot of accolades for the book already. It got the Sahitya Academy Award, was shortlisted for crosswords. But this book was written quite some time back, right? I mean, it was the first novel by Geetanjali Shree, and after that, she has written many more. And it is also after a lot of work that you have done in terms of gender studies and history. So South Asian history is when you have got this in your hands. So tell us, how has been your inclination to South Asian history and your experience of gender studies really connected to this book, right? I mean, I could see that connection when I read your profile and some more about the book and what it has been. So when was the book published in Hindi, and how the process started after that?
I don't know the exact date, but I know that I did the translation and it was published in 2000 or 2001. So I think a year or two before that.
Okay.
And then it was recently republished by Niyogi books.
Yeah.
So I have been working on different topics related to gender for at least 10 years, 12 years before that. And mine has been a very interesting and exciting journey because I had no idea that, women were important or hidden from the scholarly gaze and less talked about and all those things. Like almost everyone who's trained, in an academy, you only learn about men all the time. And that's where your vision extends to. But once I discovered it, there was no turning back. And then I looked everywhere for the hidden voices and the unrepresented and underrepresented. And the second thing that I was working on was education, or children growing up, coming of age, socialization. One of my theses was that the mother is a very important educational agent and is not talked about, but that she consciously and deliberately forms her children to be certain kinds of adults. And when I read this novel, I said, well, it's saying all the things that I'm trying to do in my research. It talks about a mother who has a very important agency in her children's lives. But very interestingly, it talks about a very perverse kind of reaction on the part of her children who do not see her agency, but rather treat her as a misfit or as a victim and try to quote unquote save her. So this made me, sometimes in scholarly research, you cannot actually see as much of the personal experience as you might be inclined to as just someone who enjoys literature. And that's the case with me. I actually feel that novels and creative literature can supplement the kind of scholarly work that people like me do through very dogged research. So I could tell the story of mothering and socialization, or I could tell the story of gendered upbringing. But if I translated the novel, it would all be done in one big push. And it was a pleasure for that reason. This has happened with me before also. I worked on The Artisans of Banaras, and then I found a Hindi novel by Abdul Bismillah called Jhimi Jhimi Bini Chadariya, which was exactly saying the same things that I was doing in my research, but they have different ways of doing
the
it.
Fictional,
Compared to history and anthropology.
Yes. Yes. So fiction sometimes gets across easier to people as compared to, let's say, research or any news item or non-fiction or even the real world, right? Sometimes people like an escape in the fictional characters.
I wouldn't say so much of an escape. It works more successfully because people like a story. It tells stories. It doesn't, it doesn't talk in abstractions or theorizations. I think it's much more difficult than actually, like Virginia Woolf said, it's easy to write history. I mean, she was making a point as a novelist, but it is. I mean, more people can write, scholarly work than can write fiction.
So this particular book, Mai, is about 3 generations of women who are living with their husbands and kids in a joint family somewhere in northern India. And everybody has their unique ways of accommodating. I really like this line: accommodating or challenging patriarchy. So so this is what like stayed with me about the book, and while I read the book more, I get to know more about their lives. And how relatable is this story for you when you started to translate it? How relatable were the characters for you? Have you met these women in your personal life sometime growing up in India?
Yeah, well, one of the ways that fiction works is by exaggerating, right?
Okay.
I've
Yes.
certainly never met a dadi like that. And she did give me the creeps. She made my hair stand on end. And God forbid I have a relative like that. But it was very familiar at the same time because, that kind of mother-in-law torturing her daughter-in-law is so well known. In fact, one of the reviewers I remember didn't like it at all. She said, "This Saas Bahu ki kahani we know so well from TV serials."
Yes.
Unfortunately, TV serials have ruined, all the nice stories by distorting
Exaggerating them.
Yeah. So, and the mother is definitely exaggerated as well. No one is that timid and that, oppressed. They do speak out. In my experience, the ones that I know are much more
Vocal.
full of gumption and all that. And the ones that were really familiar are the narrator, the main protagonist, the young girl growing up. And most of the things she observes and thinks and tries to do is stuff that I can really identify with. So, it's the same as whichever book you enjoy. There's some part that you identify with, some part which seems exaggerated, foreign, or whatever. And at the same time, it sucks you all in and you become part of that world. That's the magic of it. Before I knew it, I could visualize the home inside and outside, the way the characters moved and acted, and why they did it, and laugh aloud at certain places, worry about other things. It's a very, very simple novel, I would say, and I'm sure Geetanjali would agree. But the beauty of it has nothing to do with its complexity or simplicity, and I'm sure that there are enough examples of very simple novels being very impactful in the way they can push you into their world.
And how do you differentiate between good writing, or let's say something that would be in the literary genre, as compared to something which is not it's not in the literary genre, which is, let's say, more commercial? How do you differentiate that? I mean, I often find it very difficult to differentiate between the writing style, and where does this book stand. And since you have translated a book which has won Sahitya Academy, and the author also has won Booker, so what exactly is the kind of literature that these international platforms are looking at, and how do you differentiate personally, and what is your take on, let's say, highbrowing sometimes at some writing as compared to others? How do you see this?
Yeah, well, I'm no expert. There are plenty of experts. They sit on these committees that give awards and all that. Maybe they also don't have a pat answer, because I certainly don't. For me, it's very instinctive. When I pick up a novel to read, I either, as I was using that same term before, get sucked in. I believe in that world that the author is creating. I want to immediately know more, travel on that journey with the author. I start inhabiting that same world, which is there on the pages. Either that happens or it doesn't, and you find yourself plodding, plodding, plodding. You wait for several pages. You think it might warm up, it might, achieve what it's trying to do, and sometimes it just doesn't. And it sometimes happens with very well-known and well-reviewed authors. They just don't
Yes.
for you, and so and then you have to, of course, think, what was it that went wrong? And I think for me, it's all about the language, totally
Okay.
about the language. It's not about the story. The story could be wonderful. The plot could be very intricate. It could be very, very well finessed in terms of the way they are developing something. So that person could be a graduate of a MFA program with lots of training in creative
Creative
writing.
writing, yeah.
That would still make it seem like a different kind of product to something which happens very quote unquote naturally. I know it's not natural. The person has labored at it, but it seems to be very natural. I remember with War and Peace, and it must have
Okay.
been the particular translation I was reading. I've read it many times. When I was reading this version several years ago, I just thought, this is not very good writing, because actually Tolstoy, or the author or the translator or whatever, is working so hard at making us feel something. It should not, you should not be able to see the effort that the author has put into it. Author has, and then it should vanish, and then it should seem like the only natural world that there is. And
Okay.
sometimes that's done with short clipped sentences, sometimes with long elaborate ones. So there's no one given style, and that's what's wrong with the creative writing programs. Maybe they try to, I'm sure they do more than what I'm saying. I don't, again, have the expertise on that, but the products seem to very often speak in the same style. So it could be any style, but it has to seem effortless. It has to seem as if you can't see the building blocks, but the structure is already there. And that's the world that you want to belong to and find out more about. And I read a lot of children's literature, for example, and that's a very interesting test case, because children are a kind of foreign element. You're not a child anymore, so you don't completely identify with them. But even with children literature, now after reading so much, I can distinguish which story is going to work and which one is not. Just because of the magic that the author has meant to has succeeded in putting in. So when I say that word, I'm going to end with that magic. I'm trying to suggest that there is actually not a set of formula, and it's something a bit intangible, and you have to accept that.
Yeah. Yeah, as in there is no set template for a good fiction or for good writing. And I really like the way you said that it has to look effortless. And that is why I think the authors who write about the world they know are the ones who are most successful, as in the world that they have been or they belong to or they have seen, in a way, have, at least for the starting work, have really worked well. But then imagination has no bounds. That's also true. I mean, I'm sure the writers of paranormal fiction and those genres have some very strong imagination. But largely, by and large, I've seen, if it has to be effortless, they should have been part of that world, and that kind of brings out the story and makes it more authentic.
Yeah, the trick, however, is you don't know in what way they were part of that world.
Yes.
It could have been as a very um, contrary
Yeah.
and revolting kind of person who didn't want to be part of that world, but they just saw it either as
True.
a child or as an outsider in some way. People
True.
often write about things that seem exactly the opposite of what they are.
Hmm.
And that's because there's this other side in us, which is not
Yes.
fully expressed, which is the other side. Yeah.
Yes, there's this word called unreliable narrator that often comes in fiction writing. Is something that really intrigues me a lot, when you as an author or just the narrator of the story is so unreliable, because that person can, or that idea of that character can take the story to any direction where you haven't expected it to be. And that, I think, could be very interesting. But like I said, it really amazes me how language plays such an important role in fiction, and especially then when it is a translated work, there is so much responsibility on the translator to make it sound, or the voice of that story intact, to keep it intact to what the original author would have imagined, right? So
Well,
what?
that's why, yeah, sorry. I just want to say that that's why yours was a very important question as to what does work to
Yeah.
make something in literature better or worse or successful or not. Because the translator has to keep that same kind of um, let's
Attachment.
goal in
Yeah.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I was saying the writing has to be effortless in order to succeed, so does the
Mm.
translation have to be. You shouldn't be able to
Effortless.
say
Yeah.
what the translator is doing actually on the ground.
Absolutely. Yes, I was just going through some of your work as a Brown family professor, South Asian history professor, and doing some interesting work in Varanasi. Tell us more about what you plan to do in the future. Do you plan to write books? Will they be more fiction, nonfiction, or more academic? How do you see yourself moving ahead in the near future?
Thank you for that question. Everyone likes to talk about themselves, and I actually took retirement somewhat early, 2 years ago, because I didn't want to turn my uh, time totally to writing. Writing is
Hmm.
my first love, and while teaching, which I've been doing for 40, 50 years, you only get little periods of
Yes.
time when you can totally write. So the first thing I've done is write a film script, and that's
Mm.
been actually, that film is out in the festivals since
Wow.
October last year. It's called Shankar's Fairies,
Okay.
and it's been very well received. The next stop, we have, because of COVID, either I, who is the producer and scriptwriter, nor the main director and so on, haven't been able to go everywhere. But
Yeah.
it's been from Canada to Japan to Korea to France and Australia and everywhere. But I am going to Morocco in August to the film festival where it's
Mm.
being launched there. So that's again a story which is partly autobiographical
Mm-hmm.
and partly based on my research about a little girl who listens to stories from a
Okay.
guy called Shankar. So Shankar's Fairies is about that. And I'm writing the next two scripts. One is about the weavers of Banaras, which is again one of my topics of research. But their story has not been told as I see it, although that novel which I mentioned, Bini Chadaria by Abdul Bismillah, is about that.
Mm.
However, I want to write my own script,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm writing one which should become a musical because I'm very, very interested in music also, on children. So when I say on children, that sounds very broad, but I've been working with children
Mm.
in this organization called Nirman in
Okay.
Varanasi. from 1990. Researching and writing about them, but also teaching them on the ground and directing a school about and programs for them and so on. So it's got a very, very simple, but at the same time complicated vision of how children's lives should be enriched and how adults actually are not doing justice to children and their needs. So in this musical, I want to show some of the main issues about children, again through storylines that intersect and make it about, again, partly it's autobiographical, but based on my research. So those are the things I'm writing, apart from little pockets of other things which I write. And I have a blog, which is on WordPress by my name, in which I write about different issues, including modernization. That's a pet topic of mine, how India is changing, in what ways. But children, family, education, village life. I live in a village outside Banaras.
Oh, really? I thought you were joining us from California, and I was thinking that maybe the time zone may match, may not match.
Well, presently I am in Chicago.
Okay.
Not California, but in Chicago, but going back soon.
Okay.
Yeah. And
great.
It's wonderful to be so close to people and a village, to be part of it, and be able to really think and write about all that. I want to write a lot about changes in India. Yeah.
Great. I learned so much from you in this short conversation, and I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Nita Kapoor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.